Welcome back to Welcome back to session 5.
欢迎回到了我们这第5场。
Brother Jason has been very hard working here at this conference, so I'm very thankful for him. Yes, he is our translator extraordinaire. He doesn't have to translate that. But session 5, we're talking about slaves with smallpox.
第5这课呢，它是说到呢奴隶，这奴隶身上呢又出了这个脓痘其实
And it's all about debt.
是一个绝症。
But before we get into the debt portion, I want to wrap up some of the things related to relationships and money.
所以在我们还没有讲到这个欠债的东西之前，我们讲一讲关于感情。
We saw our flow chart of how money or our financial planning should flow.
我们看到呢，我们的个人理财呢是要这样子的一个循环。
But it all happens within the context of relationships.
那这个流程呢是在感情的范围内所做的。
Particularly family relations.
什么意思呢？是特别就是在家庭的这种感情。
So I want to talk with several classes of people.
所以要和几个不同的阶层的人。
First, the singles.
先是对那些单身的说，
Remember,
要记得，
who you marry is the single largest financial decision you'll ever make.
你和谁结婚呢？是你人生做经济决定的最大的决定。
Notice, it's not just the largest decision, it's the largest financial decision.
要注意，不是人生最大的决定哦，是人生经济上最大的决定。
What's his is hers, what's hers is his.
他的也是你的，你的也属于他的了。
So you want to make sure you want someone that you're able to be compatible with.
所以你需要找一个真的是适合和你一起的人。
Financial incompatibility is one of the most common contributors to divorce.
在财务上的不协调呢，乃是离婚最大的起因之一。
It's not to say that money is the cause of the majority of divorces,
不是说钱财是造成人离婚的原因。
but what happens is that if there are other causes of marital discord,
但是呢，在很多不同的使到婚姻起纷争的原因中，
almost every time money somehow becomes part of the mix.
但是每一次呢，钱财经济呢都会成为这个纷争的其中一部分。
And so it is so critical for singles to understand that how your partner views money is critical to the chances of success in your marriage.
所以对单身的来说，你要记得呢，就是你和谁结婚，他对金钱的态度呢，可以决定你婚姻能不能够成功。
And money issues can bankrupt the marriage figuratively and literally.
所以确确实实，金钱在实际上和在含义上呢，也可以使到你的婚姻破产。
Make sure to look for someone who is financially compatible.
所以真的需要找一个和你在金钱上有同样观念的人。
So when I say financial compatible, it doesn't mean everyone has to become all of a sudden very frugal or thrifty.
当我讲这个的时候，我不是说每个人突然间都变成很节俭、很娴熟。
Even though that is a good principle to try to apply,
虽然说这是很重要的一个原则，我们需要。
I think what's more important is that the two people actually are harmonious together in how they view money.
但是更加重要的是，我觉得两个人在他们看待钱财、管理钱财方面呢，能够有一个和谐的态度。
So how do you know whether financially you're compatible?
那你要怎么知道你和对方呢是不是适合对方？
There are a couple of ways. How is their career? Do they have any debt problems?
第一是看看他们做什么工作，他们有没有负债。
If there is an individual who might be even very spiritual,
如果有一个人他是非常属灵的一个人，
love to serve the Lord and give Bible studies,
非常爱上帝，然后非常想侍奉他，
but they simply cannot hold down a job,
但是呢，他们却无法在一个工作上呢持续很久，
or maybe they have a lot of debt.
或者是他们欠很多的债，
I would beware.
我会很小心。
Just because someone is spiritual doesn't mean there aren't other problems underneath the surface.
一个人虽然非常属灵，不代表他其他方面会有一些的问题。
Another way, watch their shopping habits.
另外一个就是看他们购物是如何去购物的。
Do they just go in on the store and just throw everything in?
他们是不是到处走，然后就看到什么就买什么这样子？
Do they notice that things are on sale or things are in season?
他们知不知道什么东西是便宜的时候，或者是有促销的，在哪里有促销之类的？
Do they understand how to keep, to be resourceful and not be as wasteful with things that they buy?
他们知不知道如何去节俭，不会去做浪费？他们当购买的时候。
Okay, what are their family's money habits like?
他们的家庭，他和他的父母，他们家庭中，他们是怎么样花费的？
You know, there's a saying in English, the apple never falls far from the tree.
在英文有一句说呢，就是孩子和父母亲呢，的习惯是很相似的。
If a young lady, you visit her mother and her mother is just flamboyant and buying lots of things and shopping all the time.
如果你去找一个年轻女士，然后去她家，她母亲是很厉害花费的，很喜欢买东西购物的。
Even if that young lady, you say, oh, she's converted.
虽然说这个她的女儿是一个信主的，赶过来的。
Remember, the apple never falls far from the tree.
要小心因为很可能他们也会有同样的习惯。
This is a good one. What kind of gifts do they expect?
这是很重要的一点，他们喜欢你送他们什么礼物？
If they like flowers, or do they like potted flowers, right?
他们喜欢盆栽可以种的吗？
Flowers that I can grow, right? And have flowers every year. That's one example,
可
right?
以种的呢，然后每年。
And listen, I'm not saying that there's a right or wrong kind of gift.
我不是说有一个可以给的礼物，不可以给的，不是说这样的东西。
What I'm saying is you need to have a clear picture. The type of things that this person expects from me, is this compatible with my own values?
你要知道呢，他所希望从你得到的这种礼物方面呢，这两者之间对你来说和你的金钱的观念呢符不符合？
So let me tell you the story that you're all waiting to hear.
这个故事你们一直都等着要听的故事。
So when I was ready to propose to my wife,
当我准备好要向我的太太求婚的时候，
it was time to get the watch.
是时候买手表的时候。
Now, I had been doing, it's sort of a long explanation, but I somehow got these points that I was able to buy a watch from Amazon.com for free.
所以呢，因为各种原因呢，我已经储蓄足够的这个分数呢，可以在 Amazon 上面呢去换一个手表。
It was a nice watch. It's not like a toy Mickey Mouse watch.
是很美的手表不是那种玩具手表。
But neither was it like diamond-studded gold watch. It wasn't that nice, but it was really elegant and, nice quality watch.
但也不是好像镀金的那手表，还是有钻石，很美很好的手表。
And so some ladies would look at that and say, eh.
有一些女士呢，会听到这个，她觉得怎么可以这样呢？
You're so insincere.
你是不诚恳，
You didn't even pay with that with your own money,
你连自己出钱买都没有做到，
right?
对不对？
Some ladies would say, you're worthless.
有些女士就说：“哎呀，你真的是太没用了。”
But again, the point is financial compatibility, right?
是，所以最重要的是你和她之间符不符合。
I knew that my wife came from a family that was extremely thrifty.
我知道呢，我太太她的家庭、她的家人呢，都是非常节俭的。
Her father
她的父亲，
would, when you turn on the water, you're waiting for the hot water in your shower.
当你开水等热水器的水变热了，
He would put a bucket to catch the water, cold water,
他会拿一个盆去装那个冷的水，
in order to go flush the toilet with it
然后呢，拿那个冷的水去冲马桶，
and to water his plants.
然后用那个水去浇花。
Some of you might do that still.
我们有一些当中人还是这样做的，
But in America, nobody does that.
是在美国没有人这样做的。
And so I knew that was the type of person she was.
所以我知道他是很节俭的人。
And so when I proposed and I gave her the watch,
所以当我向她求婚，给她那手表的时候，
you know what?
知道什么事情发生吗？
She liked the watch,
很喜欢那手表，
but she liked even more that it was a free watch.
当她知道是免费的手表的时候，她更加喜欢那个手表了。
So it wasn't the watch that she liked.
所以她不是只喜欢那个手表，
It was the fact that yes, this guy knows how to save money.
她很高兴的是这男士呢，他会节省钱。
It convinced her. She says, "Oh yes, of course I'll marry you."
她说我可以跟你结婚，因为你很节省。
But there's more to the story.
但是呢，这故事还有更多的。
After we got engaged, right?
在我们订婚后，
Or if you're engaged,
如果你订婚，你是订婚的。
you got to remember now, during the engagement time, now is the time to make sure there are no money secrets.
在你订婚过后呢，是时候呢，让你们之间呢没有金钱的秘密，
Have the money talk.
需要呢坐下来谈判关于钱财方
You
面，
should discuss openly your views on money. Be honest, be transparent.
要很诚实、很开放的呢，互相的交换呢，你们对钱财的思想观念。
So after we got engaged, one day my wife or fiance then, she said, we need to talk.
所以当我们订婚后呢，那时候我的未婚妻呢，她就告诉我，我们需要坐下来谈。
She said, I need to talk about money.
她说我们需要谈关于钱财。
And I thought, oh no,
想惨了，
she's got some sort of huge debt that I don't know about.
因为她有欠很多的钱，
Or she has some illness that costs so much money.
或者是她有什么疾病啊之类的，需要花很多的钱。
She said, sit down.
她说坐下来。
She said, look at this.
她说你看这个，
It was her bank, her checkbook.
这是她的这个支票，
It showed how much money she had in her bank account.
这是她的这个银行户口本，
She had a lot of money.
很多钱在她的户口里。
And I thought,
我在想，
what? And she said, I didn't want to tell you this earlier
她说呢，我之前不想告诉你这个东西，
because I was afraid that would change the dynamics of our relationship.
因为她说我害怕这会使到我们的感情有改变。
I understood that,
我明白她的意思，
but at the same time, she realized if we're going to have a happy marriage, we needed to talk about this.
但是呢，她知道呢，如果我们的婚姻要美满的话，我们需要谈这些东西的。
So inside, I was impressed.
所以我心里我非常非常欣赏她的。
And later on in this presentation, you'll find out about how much she had saved up.
我之后呢，知道呢，她储蓄多少钱。
But for some reason, I had a strange response.
但是呢，很奇怪的呢，我的反应有一点不一样。
I said, where have you been keeping this money?
我就说呢，你这个钱是收在哪里？
She said, I've had it in the bank account, like a CD. Here, I think they call them fixed deposits, right?
他们就说呢，我在这个银行这个定期存款里面存着。
Maybe a couple, maybe 1%, maybe less than 1%, something like that.
在美国那时候是大概1%左右的意思。
And what I told her
如果我告诉她的是，
was, why didn't you put it over here where you could have gotten 3 or 4%?
如果问她为什么你不把这个钱放在这一边，你可以赚了3%、4%的利息啊？
So instead of getting upset with me,
而可是她又没有生气我，
she thought, oh,
她就想
I can't believe I've left so much money sitting on the table.
说，哎，我没有想到我这么多的钱就这样放这而已。
And she said, okay, from now on,
她说好，从现在开始
I'll save the money
我会存钱，
and you go invest it for me.
你去投资。
And she said, okay, this is a great arrangement.
她说这样很好。
And interestingly enough, as a part of that conversation,
然后呢，在这个谈判的时候，
she said, I was worried about you.
她说呢，她就说我其实蛮担心的。
She said, I thought you spent too much money.
她想呢，我以为呢你会花很多钱的。
Because she saw how I live with my family, some of the habits we have wasn't exactly as thrifty as her family.
因为她看见了我的生活和我和我家人他们生活方式呢是不是很省钱的。
So once we started having this conversation, she began to understand, oh, he's not so bad after all.
所以当我们有这个谈的这一个方面之后，她就发现哦，其实挺好的，没有很浪费的奢侈的。
And so we were able to come to an agreement on how we want to spend the money.
所以呢，我们可以有一个共同的思想呢，我们要如何的去花钱。
And then if we aren't clear on where we stand with each other on money, we really aren't ready to get married.
因为如果我们两方面呢，如果还不能够统一的话呢，我们婚姻就不好。
And one of the best ways during the engagement is to plan the wedding together.
所以其中一个最重要的东西，就是在订婚的时候，就是要计划婚礼应该是要怎么举行。
It will be an experience to work together, but also both parties can see how the other person reacts.
因为呢，在这一段时间，你就可以看到双方面的呢，他们的态度、他们的反应是怎么样子。
I had a friend once who said something like this.
我一个朋友，他曾经告诉我，
He said, "Oh, the wedding, that's the woman's day. I'll let her deal with it."
他说：“哦，这个婚礼呢是女生的事，他会处理的。”
Until after the wedding and he got the bill.
然后呢，婚礼过后呢，他拿到账单的时候，
He said, "I should have been involved more."
他说：“我应该要多参与这个计划。”
All right, so if you're married,
好，最后的就是那些已经结婚了。
you got to remember money is a team sport.
你要记得是钱财是一个合作性的一个游戏。
You have become one flesh.
因为你们两人已经合为一体了。
And that also means the bank accounts.
那就是说，我们的银行户口也会成为一体。
Now, there may be circumstances where you need to have separate accounts.
当然，很多时候我们是需要有不同的银行户口。
But the point is there should be no
但
secrets.
是重要的是，我们这之间呢不可以有秘密的、隐藏的。
So the wife should be able to see the husband's account, the husband should be able to see the wife's account, vice versa.
所以丈夫是可以看太太的银行户口，太太也可以看见。
Or you can merge them if you want to.
或者是你们也可以做联名的户口。
The point is that you are one now, so you should know what each other are doing.
所以很重要的就是呢，他的思想就是我们是一体的，所以两者都没有秘密。
And you should have one person be the primary financial caretaker, not both.
一个人呢做这个管理钱财的这个主要的看顾者。
So the person who keeps track of the receipts, who pays the bills, it should be one person, not split between the two.
所以那个收集所有的单据所有的收据计算每个月开销的那个人，收集那些是同一个人，不可以两个人都一起做。
It's just simply for the purpose of making sure nothing falls between the cracks.
那是因为呢，就不可以迷失或者是漏了哪一些东西。
And whichever one of the two is better with numbers and math, make that person the caretaker.
而两个人之间呢，谁的数学比较好，谁的账目比较好，他就需要做这个工作了。
Okay, but that doesn't mean that one person doesn't know anything about it. You need to create and review your goals and your plans together.
但是这也不代表就是一个人做，另外一个人什么也不知道，不是这样，而是两个人都需要一起同行的。
So be in agreement, but then have one person be the primary manager.
所以两个人需要同心，需要合意，但是呢，其中一个是需要管理的主权的。
And this is a nice rule to set, and that is have a dollar amount over which no purchase occurs without joint discussion.
其实这个很好的一个意见就是呢，你需要设定一个数量，超过这个数量的花费呢，就必须要两个人一起讨论才能够花费的。
Just make it a rule in your house.
就成为一个在家中的规则。
And you come up with a number.
然后你可以设定
Together.
自己的，两个人一起设定。
It might be 100,
可能是100块、
200, 500.
500块。
You decide and you just say, it's a rule. If someone comes to you and say, you need to buy this right now, it's a special deal.
决定了就是这个数目。如果有人告诉你，哦，这个你一定要买的，这个是特别的价钱，现在一定要买的。
No need to negotiate, just say, I have to talk to my wife.
你就不需要谈判，说我需要和我的太太讨论过，
It will save you a lot of grief.
就可以让你没有那么多伤心的事。
And include some fun money for each other in the budget.
在这个预算中呢，也应该留一点点呢，就是可以大家一起享受的一个钱。
This is especially important if there's one person who really wants to save and another person who's more free and generous.
这个呢非常重要，特别是如果两方面呢有一者是很节俭，一直要储蓄钱，另一个又比较喜 欢用钱，或者是比较大方的。
You just carve out a certain portion every month and say, you can do whatever you want, no judgment.
然后呢，你每个月就可以将一部分的钱呢规划，说这一笔钱呢你可以用，然后呢不会指责你，你可以
It's like a little pressure release valve. It's like,
就好像一个解压的这个方式。
and then you should celebrate the victories together.
然后呢，你们双方面如果达到了一些目标的时候呢，应该一起的庆祝。
So, for us, when we paid off the house, we went out and we had a nice dinner together.
所以当我们就还清了我们屋子的贷款后呢，我们就一起出去呢吃一场好的。
And the point is to make the finances in the home a point of unity for the family instead of a point of conflict.
重要的是呢，要将我们的理财呢成为家中团结的一个方式，不是引起纷争的一个方式。
So for an example, let's say we have children.
比如说我们家中有孩子，
We can have a mission project goal.
我们可以有一个布道的一个目标。
We can, for a mission trip or to sponsor an orphan or to help build a church somewhere.
就是呢，可以一起储蓄，就是有一个目标，可以去做一些圣工的工作啊，可能资助一些孤儿啊之类的。
So the parents obviously can contribute,
所以父母亲是可以把钱放进去。
but they can include the children and say, oh, what can you do to earn money to give to this kind of service?
但孩子也可以一起的参与，就是你们孩子可以做些什么，可以挣钱来为这个目标工作。
So finances becomes not something that we only argue over,
所以呢，金钱不再是一个我们吵架的一个地方，
but rather something that we can pursue unitedly together as a family.
而是呢一个家庭一起可以完成的目标的一个方式，
And it can even be a fun thing.
也可以成为非常有趣、可以享受的一样事。
So we're giving you this context of relationships.
所以呢，我让你看见到这个感情呢是很重要的一个环节。
This is not in the slide, but I'll just mention this. I feel impressed to say it.
我被感动了，我想要分享一点点，
And that is, what about loaning money
就是关于借钱，
to family and friends,
就是借钱给朋友或者是亲戚，
or borrowing money from family or friends?
或者是向朋友或者是亲戚向他们借钱。
I'll tell you what we do in our home.
我要告诉你，我们在家是怎么做的。
We have a policy.
我们有一个规则，
We don't borrow and we don't lend money to family or friends.
我们是不向朋友、家庭借钱，也不借钱给他们。
We just make it a blanket rule, applies to everybody.
这是一个大致上的一个规则，每一个人都一样。
We've seen too many relationships broken because of money being lent.
因为我们发现到呢，太多的这种家属的感情呢，因为钱财的原因
Family members that don't talk to each other for years,
很多年亲戚呢不说话，
all for maybe a couple $1,000s.
就是几千块而已，就因此呢不说话了。
Relationships are more important than that.
因为感情呢比钱财更加。
So if someone has a need, financial need,
所以如果有人确实很需要钱的话，
we do what we can to help.
我们就会尝试去帮助他，
Varies depending on circumstance,
就是看他的情况帮助。
but we never loan money.
但是我们不会借钱的，
Sometimes we give,
有时候我们会给钱，
but we don't expect it back.
但是呢，我们不要他还的。
But even that, sometimes you need to be careful.
就算是这样呢，你也很小心，
You don't want to give a drunk person a drink.
你不要给这个喝酒的人酒哦。
So for an example, if you have a family member who lost all their money because of gambling, right?
比如说你有一个家亲属呢，他钱花光了，因为他赌博。
Giving him money and especially loaning him money, don't do it.
如果你给钱他，特别是如果你借钱给他呢，是不会帮助他的。
To help them is to help them cure the addiction to gambling.
如果你要帮助他呢，是要帮助他脱离他的毒瘾。
So that's not a principle that I think, that I'm saying everyone has to abide by, but that's just what we've chosen to do in our home.
这个原则不是我告诉每个人都要这样做，不是，只是我家里是这样做的。
So let's continue to our topic on debt now.
如果我们继续看到这个关于贷款的事项，
As we've read earlier, the borrower is servant or slave to the lender.
就像我们之前所说过的，那个借钱的人呢，就成为给他借钱的人的仆人了。
And we should avoid debt as we would the smallpox.
我们必须要远离贷款，就好像远离病症一样。
So debt is bad.
因为贷款呢是很糟糕的事。
It's like slavery.
欠钱呢就好像做奴隶一样。
It's like being a slave while suffering from smallpox.
就像是你得到绝症的时候呢，还要给人家做奴隶一样。
It's the feeling of having your hair set on fire.
是感觉像呢你的头发被火烧一样。
You want to get it out, put it out as fast as you can.
你要越快把这火灭掉就越好。
But it is not a sin.
但是不是一个罪。
We read this earlier. Ellen White asked for $2,000 to help print books.
好像我们看见怀师傅说，他要求人借他2000块去印刷一些书籍。
And she says that the sale of the books will pay back the debt.
而他说呢，卖了书的钱呢，很快就能够还这个债。
So what are the rules for when debt is acceptable or not acceptable?
所以在借钱方面呢，有什么样的规则？
First rule is never borrow money for something that goes down in value.
第一就是不可以借钱呢，买一些价值会跌的东西，下降的东西。
That's just simple math.
这是数学而已。
Why would I pay you $10 for $5?
我给你10块钱，你给我5块钱，这样的交易，我为什么要做呢？
That's what happens when we pay interest.
这就是当我们还利息的时候所做的。
We're paying more for something than it's worth.
我们是还一些比它价值更高的东西。
Number two,
第二，
this is actually a principle that we derive from Ellen White herself.
这是第二个，是我们从怀师母她的例子中呢得到的原则。
Borrowing is acceptable only if what you're buying can pay off the debt.
借钱呢是允许的，因为呢，只要它是你买的东西是可以还清你的债的话呢，那你就可以去借钱。
So Ellen White's example is she's borrowing money to print books for sale, and the books that are sold can in turn repay the debt.
所以怀师母她借钱呢是印书，印书卖了之后呢，那个钱是可以还她的债。
So what about these things?
所以这些东西呢，
Is it acceptable to borrow money to buy an iPhone?
可不可以借钱买手提电话呢？
No.
可以。
What about a vacation?
如果去度假呢？
Not a good
借
idea.
钱去。
What about a car?
汽车呢？
Not a good idea.
不是一个很好的办法。
However,
然而，
sometimes I understand there may be circumstances with paying cash might be a problem, but the point is to not overpay. That's the point.
有时候呢，借钱呢，我很难就是做到呢，用现金去购买。但是呢，要知道就是不可以花比它价值更高的代价去购买。
Because the interest and depreciation all of a sudden magnifies your losses.
因为当你有利息的时候，然后那个物品的价值又下降的时候呢，差距就会很大了。
So the iPhone, a brand new iPhone in the US, $650 for the cheapest one.
比如说 iPhone 最便宜的呢，在美国是美金650块。
After 1 year, it's only worth $400.
一年过后呢，它价值只有400块。
But if you bought that with 10% interest in 1 year, you paid $715 instead.
如果你是借钱去买的话，如果那个借钱是18%利息的话呢，它的价值就变成715块了。
So the difference is $315.
所以现在它的差距就是315块了。
Now that iPhone is going to depreciate no matter what.
因为那个电话的价值呢，一定会下降的。
So you will lose value because you're using the thing.
所以当你用的时候呢，它的价值一定会慢慢的消失。
But why pay an extra 10% for that?
但是为什么你要花多18%的价格去购买呢？
Vacation, same thing.
同样的，在你去旅行的时候，
Only you can't ever sell your vacation experience for money.
只是呢，你去度假呢是过后就没有价值了，不能再卖回去了。
You sell your phone, you can get something back.
电话你还可以重售了。
And the car, similar story.
车也是一样的。
Only difference is it becomes a much larger figure. The interest, the percentage of interest becomes much, much bigger.
只是呢，它这一个贷款利息的这个 数字呢会增加而已。
So while cars do go down in value inevitably,
所以虽然汽车它的价值一定是会下降的，
what I have found
我发现的是，
is that the sweet spot for a new car that has also lost the greatest amount of depreciation,
就是呢，新车它失去的价值是最高的，
that still has the reliability is what I mean.
还是有，
Reliability, not needing as much fixing.
所以呢，就是说呢，虽然你买一个二手车哦，它的价值还是可以它是还很耐用的这辆车。
You just want to look for a car that has low mileage within the 2, 3, 4-year range, somewhere in there.
你要找呢，它这个可以跑，就是它的使用这个油的耗费没有这么多的这个时间呢，是2、3年的车。
In the US, probably the same here, the first year or two is the greatest amount of value lost on the vehicle.
在美国，在马来西亚也或许是一样，就是一辆新车，它失去的价值在头2年呢是最大的。
So paying interest on depreciating assets, there's no sure way to lose money.
所以如果你又买一个会失去价值的东西，又在借钱，就是用利息去还的话呢，是会失去很多钱的。
So what are some acceptable forms of debt then?
所以什么样的贷款是适合的呢？
It can't go down in value, and whatever you pay with it should be able to pay it off.
就是一个不会失去价值的东西，而且当你卖掉的时候呢，是可以还债的。
A house?
屋子
Houses generally go up in value,
通常一个屋子它的价钱是会上升的，
and by buying it, you reduce the amount you need to pay in rent to someone else.
而当你买屋子的话，你就不需要租屋子，那么你就不会失去租屋子的钱。
In education,
教育
while in America student loans are going out of control, the principle is education is something valuable that should be able to pay itself off.
虽然说在美国很多的这些学生贷款越来越多，但是它的中心思想是这个教育是非常重要的。长期来说呢，你的教育可以还清你的贷款。
And also business.
还有生意，
That's actually what Ellen White was borrowing money for.
那就是怀师母借钱
Capital to produce goods for sale.
就是呢借一些资金制造一些产品，可以去售卖还债的。
So while it is acceptable to borrow money for those things, it is still ideal if we don't have to.
所以呢，虽然借钱为这些事情借钱是可以做的，但是呢，我们不一定要去做。
Sometimes, unfortunately, it is necessary though.
虽然有些时候确实是需要去做。
So what about credit cards?
所以信用卡怎么办？
Credit cards themselves are not dangerous.
信用卡它本身呢不是很危险的东西。
It is the use of credit cards without self-control that's dangerous.
只是呢，如果你没有自制的能力去用的话呢，就成为很危险的东西。
And the fact is, it is possible to live without credit cards.
而事实是呢，如果我们没有信用卡的话，还是可以生活的。
People might have this idea that, oh, you must have it. No, you can survive without it.
有些人觉得我们一定要有信用卡才能够生活，其实你可以没有信用卡的。
And credit cards do come with some amount of benefits.
咱们信用卡是有一些的好处的。
So what are some proper usage tips for credit cards?
所以你用信用卡的时候，有没有一些好的方式去使用，正确的方式？
Don't use them to buy stuff that you don't need.
不要用它买你不需要的东西。
You should have a spending plan. That's why you have the whole budget that we talked about.
也就是说，你需要有一个消费的计算，
Never carry a balance, pay off your card every month.
不可以欠信用卡的债，每个月都要还清。
And if you can't follow these two rules, then cut up your card and don't use it.
如果你前面2个你不能达到的话呢，那就把它减掉好了，不可以用。
Self-control, that's the key.
因为呢，自制控制的能力呢是很重要的。
But if you do use cards,
但是如果你真的是用卡的话，
consolidate, don't spread out your use across 12 different cards. Use a small number so you actually accumulate rewards that are useful.
不要呢就用很多不同的卡呢，你的花费就分散去了。然而你选择用少量几张的卡呢，让你可以得到最大的利益。
And you definitely want to use cards that have rewards.
而你要用那些有利益的卡，就是可以有一些回酬的卡。
So, for me in the U.S., I have a card that gives me 2% back for every purchase.
所以呢，在美国呢，我有一张卡，它是我在做每一样消费呢，它都会还我2%的。
And so, every purchase I put on the card, or every purchase as much as possible, I try to put on the card and I just pay it off every month.
所以呢，我就用那个卡去买我需要的东西，然后每个月我就还掉它，它给我2%的回酬。
So, what if we already have debt? What do we do?
所以如果我们已经有债务的话，怎么办呢？
All right, we need to make sure we own the debt. Don't make excuses and don't become the victim. Don't just blame other people.
第一，我们一定要承认我们是负责这个债的，不要把这个债务的责任推去别人身上，不要为自己找借口。
We have to understand that there will be no alternative to making big payments.
我们要知道呢，要还这个债呢以外呢，没有别的选择了。
There aren't special tricks that just get you out of debt. You will pay it back.
没有捷径的，没有让你我不需要还债的办法，你一定要还那个债。
You will make it a priority.
你要把这个债务呢成为你最优先需要还清的东西。
Using your short-term savings plan and your monthly spending plan for that.
就要用你每个月的这个预计和你这个储蓄计划去。
And I tell people, don't worry about putting money in other forms of investment while you're paying off, especially high-interest debt.
而我常常告诉人们呢，你不要担心要怎么样去投资，你先还清，特别是高利息的债，要把它还。
Because if you think about it, that is your best investment.
因为如果你真正去想的话，那就是最好的投资了。
Let's say you have a credit card that charges you 25% interest.
比如说，你有一张信用卡，它的利息是25%的。
If you pay it off early,
如果你早还掉的话，
you have gotten a 25% rate of return
你就得到了25%的回酬，
at no risk.
没有风险的。
Not many investments can do that risk-free for you.
在这世上呢，已经没有任何的投资呢，没有风险的给你这么高的回酬了。
And then to pay off the debt, use what's called the debt snowball method.
所以如何的去还清债呢？有一个办法就是叫做这个滚雪的办法。
So the idea is you start small, and as you keep rolling, the snowball gets bigger and bigger.
他的思想是呢，你开始的时候先还小的，然后呢越来越多，越来越多。
So list your debts from smallest to largest balance.
所以将你所有的债务呢，从最小的债务开始，然后列到最大的债务。
You want to continue paying your minimum payments on all the debts except the smallest.
你在其他的债务上呢，你都还最低的限度，但是最小的呢，你就要还最多。
And then you focus your intense efforts to pay the smallest one off with as much money as you can, and then once that one's paid off, you roll all the extra payments onto the next one on the list.
所以你就要集中还清那最小的债，还清了那最少的呢，你就去下一个债，最小第二小的债。
So using this example, this person has 4 debts here.
比如说这个人他有4个不同的债。
Credit cards 1 and 2, a car loan, and student loan.
他有2个信用卡的债，一个车债，还有一个学生债。
$38,500.
总共呢是38000。
So if he can put $1,000 a month towards the debt,
如果他每个月有1000块可以拿去还债的话，
first month the first card is gone.
第一个月第一张卡就还清了。
And then all the extra next month in the second card.
然后呢，剩余的呢，他就去还第二张卡。
In less than about 4 months,
大概4个月的时间，
both cards are gone.
2张卡都可以还清。
And then all the remaining money dump into the next smallest loan, which is $10,000.
然后呢，就把剩余的钱呢全部去还第3个，就是那个车债。
And then you go to the student loans, $25,000.
然后去到呢学生的贷款。
And doing it in this manner without really increasing the 1,000 very much, in about 3 years, this person will be debt-free.
如果他这样做的话呢，如果他不需要增加1000块多少哦，他在3年多的时间呢就可以还清他的债了。
And the reason we do it in this way is because it gives you the sense of accomplishment. You're getting things done.
为什么要这样做呢？是让你感觉到呢有成就的一种感觉。
Because you can also do it another way, and that is list your debts from highest to lowest interest rate.
当然，有另外一个方式可以做，就是列出最高的利息排到最低的利息。
And if you go from paying off from highest to lowest interest rate, you'll save the most money in the end.
当然，如果当你排最高利息到最低利息这样还清的话呢，你可以节省最多的钱。当然。
But by going from the smallest to largest balance, it's easier on the mind.
但是如果你从最少的欠钱到最多的欠钱的方式这样去还的话呢，是让你的思维上呢得到最大的鼓励。
It helps maintain your momentum as you go.
帮助你呢能够有动力继续去还清那个债。
So if you started off with a $25,000 loan,
如果你开始说需要还那个25000的债的话，
you might be paying on this for a year,
你可能要还1年多的时间才还清。
and you still see four debts on your books.
你还看到呢，你还欠4个债。
It's easy to get discouraged.
所以就会灰心。
But if after just a few short months, it looks like half the debts are gone.
但是如果在4个月里面你还了2个债的话，你发现好像还了1半的债。
It's much easier to keep going.
那你就有动力的继续去还债了。
So you may pay a little bit more in interest, but at least you get out of debt.
所以可能你在利息上要还多一点，但是呢，它帮助你呢从债中出来。
Paying off debt is the best investment.
还债呢是最好的投资方式了。
Because if you regret being debt free, it's easy to go back.
因为如果你后悔你没有债的话呢，你很容易就可以有债了。
It's like just give it a try, see how you like being debt free.
所以尝试一下，可能你会很喜欢无债的生活。
If you really don't like it, I can point you to a few places
如
to
果你
borrow.
真的不喜欢没有欠债的话呢，我可以让你看一些不同的东西。
So let's talk about buying a house.
我们讲一讲关于买屋子。
Let me tell you our story.
这是我们的故事。
This is our house here.
这是我们的屋子。
I cut it off, but there's a little office building. It's a guest house off to the side there.
这个图片切了一点哦，但是旁边那里呢，还有另一个一栋楼呢是做办公室的。
So we own 1 acre out in the country.
我们在室外呢有1亩的地。
And in Tennessee, which is one of the lowest cost of living states in the U.S.
在 Tennessee 呢是美国其中一个生活费最低的一个州属。
So for our 1 acre property with 2 houses on it,
所以我们那1亩地有2栋房子的。
we bought it 3 years ago for $185,000 US.
我们3年前买的时候呢是185000块美金。
We had an $85,000 mortgage.
我们借了85000。
We got a 15-year fixed rate mortgage at 3.5% interest.
我们借的贷款呢是15年的，在3.49%。
This is an incredibly low interest rate.
这个是非常非常低的。
Historically in the U.S., it's very low.
在美国这个也是非常非常低的。
When my parents bought their home, it was more like 8%.
当我的父母亲买屋子的时候是大概8%左右。
And it's been up to 12% even before that.
之前呢甚至是12%以上。
So our monthly minimum payments for the 15-year mortgage was $607.
所以我们最低限度去还这个利息呢是607块。
But our actual payments per month came out to be about $3,700.
但是我们每个月还的呢是大概3700左右。
And we had a $100,000 down payment.
而我们的这个头期呢，我们是还10万。
So you remember my story about the talk I had with my wife?
所以你记得我和我太太有的这个谈话吗？
The majority of this was saved before we got married.
多数的这个头期钱呢是结婚以前他就储蓄下来的。
So she's been saving. She had a dream.
所以他有一个梦想。
She had a dream to buy her first house in cash.
小时候呢就有一个梦想呢，他以后要买的屋子呢是要用现金买的。
So she started saving the moment she graduated from school.
所以他从学校毕业过后呢就开始存钱了。
And this was a part of that discussion we had that night when she wanted to talk before we got married.
所以我们在结婚前，我们其中一个讨论的东西就是这个。
So I wasn't able to buy a house in cash for her.
所以呢，虽然没有办法为她用现金买这种房子
But I was able to convince her that by buying a house with 2 buildings or property with 2 buildings, we can collect rent on the second one.
但是呢，我很恳切的呢，就让她幸福呢，就是如果我们买这个地有2间屋子，我们可以租1间出去，然后呢 可以还这个利息。
And the rent on the second building covered our entire mortgage.
然后呢，我们租出去的这第二间房子呢，就还清了我们的所有的这个屋子贷款。
So the big secret to how we paid it off in 2 years, number one was because my wife saved like crazy
所
before.
以第一个秘密就是呢，我的太太呢，很疯狂的呢，就储蓄了很多的头期钱。
And the second one is we made really big monthly payments.
第二就是呢，我们每个月还很多的这个贷款。
So even the rental income paid for all the mortgage, we added on top of that.
所以虽然我们租出去的房子呢，可以还足够的支付这个贷款呢，我们甚至再加钱进去呢去还它。
So a lot of our extra savings went in about 6 times the minimum payment.
所以呢，我们很多多余的这些储蓄呢，我们都放进去呢还这个贷款。
Essentially what we did was we lived on my one income and my wife's second income went entirely into the house for 2 years.
所以我们是怎么办到的呢？就是呢，我们就只用我一个人的薪水呢过生活，我太太的第二份薪水呢就全部拿去付款。
So it's all about our savings rate.
所以其实呢，全部都是储蓄的。
So some people say, why did you pay off the house so soon?
有些人就问我，为什么你要这么快还清你的贷款呢？
We didn't have to.
你其实不需要。
We just enjoy the feeling of being out of debt, being rent and mortgage free.
其实我们不需要，我们只是很喜欢生活在一个没有债务的情况之下。
And yes, we could have invested the difference and gotten probably a higher rate of return than 3.5%.
而是的，或许我们可以把那笔钱拿去做投资，得到的回酬是比还清的贷款更高的。
But it eliminated the single largest expense in our budget.
但是呢，这个呢就可以去除我们每个月最大的开销。
And so what that's enabled us to do is for my wife to quit her job and stay home with the baby.
那让我们做得到的就是呢，我的太太可以持续她的工作呢，在家照顾孩子。
And now we just continue living on my one income, which is what we've been doing anyway.
而现在呢，我们就只用我一个人的薪水过生活，就是我们之前就已经是这样做的。
So we own our house now instead of the bank, so there's no risk of foreclosure.
所以现在呢，我们已经拥有我们的屋子，银行不拥有我们的屋子了，所以它不能够收回这间屋子。
And now we're able to have more cash freed up from our monthly spending for other things.
然后呢，我们每个月现在呢，又有更多的钱可以去用作不同的地方。
And so, like I mentioned, we paid off the mortgage the very same month our baby was born.
所以呢，好像之前我说的，我的孩子出生的那一个月呢，我们就把屋子的贷款还清了。
Just one less thing to stress about.
所以我们就少了一样需要烦恼。
And of course, it's nice where we live. This is winter time last year on our back porch.
我们住的地方非常的漂亮，下面这个是冬天的时候。
And it's very quiet there.
非常安静宁静的地方。
So here's another thing.
这是另一样事情。
We saved a lot of interest.
我们储蓄了很多不需要还的这个利息。
3.5% interest, we say, oh, that's so low.
3.28%，我们觉得，哎呀，这么少的这个利息。
But multiplied across multiple decades of mortgage, it ends up being still a fair bit of money.
但是如果你把它乘以这么多年我们需要还的话呢，就变成相当可观的数目了。
Most mortgages in the United States now are 30 years.
现在美国多数的这个贷款呢，都是30年的贷款。
I don't have those numbers here, but I have the 15-year, which is what we got.
这里我没有它的号码，我们只有15年，这是我们有的。
So in 15 years, at 3.5% interest, we would have paid $24,300 in interest.
如果我们还这个利息的话，还15年，我们就会还了24000的这个利息。
But because we paid it off so quickly in 2 years, we only paid $3,300 in interest.
但是因为我们在2年内就还完了，所以我们只还了3300块的利息而已。
So that means we actually saved $21,000 in interest.
也就是说，长期来说，我们已经省下了2万块的利息钱。
3.5% sounds small, but $21,000 doesn't sound so small to me.
所以当我们说3%好像很少，但是呢，2万块钱听起来就很多了。
And of course, the higher the interest rate, the bigger this savings difference would be if you pay it off early.
那 当然，我们如果借的利息越高的话，还清后我们所省下的更多。
All right, so in the last section of this seminar here, we're going to talk about a method of getting the dream house.
所以我们最后这一段呢，会教导我们怎么可以得到我们想要得到的家。
We're pretty happy with the house where we're in right now,
我们现在住的家，我们很开心的，其实。
but our house is quite small.
但是我们家相当的小。
So many people, they have a dream of having a bigger home. Maybe they want to have more kids.
所以很多人在想的，可能要大一点的家，要多一点的孩子啊。
So how should one go about doing that? Is there a smart way to buy a house?
所以有没有办法做到呢？有没有一个很聪明的方式去买家？
So the numbers are US numbers, but I think the methodology probably still works here.
我想这些数目虽然是美国的数字，但是我觉得这个步骤呢，应该是可以运用的。
So suppose we have a dream home that is $300,000 out in the country.
比如说，我们的梦想的家呢是30万块的家呢，在乡下的。
Is it better to get a small house first and pay it off early and then move to the big house?
我们买一个小间的家过后呢，再去搬迁大间的家比较好。
Or is it better just to go straight for the bigger house since I can afford the monthly payments?
还是我们应该直接去买一个大间的家呢？
So we have two families, the big family, the small family.
所以我们有两个人，一个是大家，一个是小家。
And the big family goes straight for the big house, $300,000.
大家呢，他就第一次过呢就去买最大的屋子，他要的那个屋子。
The small family buy a house half that price at $150,000.
那小家呢，就先买一个半价的屋子。
Okay, both of them have the same amount of down payment, $30,000.
他们两个人都有同样的头期，就是3万块。
So the remaining balance, which is the mortgage amount, is $270 here and $120 here.
剩下他们所需要付的这个贷款呢，就是27万，另外一个是12万。
So they both have 4.5% interest rates.
他们两个人都需要还4.5%的利息。
The bigs plan to pay it off in 30 years, while the small, they pay it off in 10.
那大家庭呢，他就决定了30年还清，小家庭觉得10年就可以还清了。
These will be their monthly payments, $1,300, $1,200.
这就是他们每个月需要还的贷款，一个是1300，一个是1200。
All right, so after the first 10 years,
所以在10年过后，
this is how much they would have made in payments over here, $164,000.
那大家庭呢，他们就还了多少呢？他们还了16万。
And this does not include the 30,000, which is on top of that.
这是不包括那个头期3万块钱哦。
Okay, and then over here they paid 150,000 roughly,
而小家庭呢，还的也大概15万，
which also does not include the 30,000.
也是不包括这个头期的。
Except this family now own their $150,000 house.
只是呢，现在这小家庭已经买下了这个屋子，是属于他们的了。
This family still owes the bank.
这大家庭呢，还是欠银行的。
Okay, so let's take a look at the second 10 years.
现在我们看第二个10年，
So the big family, they're continuing doing the same thing for another 10 years, same payments.
所以这个大家庭呢，他们继续做他们做的工作，就是继续还银贷款。
The small family now upgrade their smaller house to the bigger house.
这个小家庭现在呢，就从小的屋子换一个大的屋子。
Their previous house was worth 150,000.
之前他们的屋子是15万的，
So the balance now is 150,000 on the new house.
所以他们买这个新的家的时候呢，他们就给了头期，只需要借一半的贷款。
And they are going to pay it off again in 10 years.
他们也决定了10年内就要把它还清。
And you remember the bigs, they've still got 20 more years.
而你记得这个大家庭，他还有20年还要还。
So their monthly payment for the small family now is a little bit higher at $1,500.
所以现在小家庭呢，他们每个月需要还的比较多的，就是1500。
So at the end of their 20th year, they would have paid $186,000 for their second house.
所以在这第20年的结束时候呢，小家庭也还清了这个第二间屋子的贷款，还了18万。
But they own the big house now
而现在呢，他们拥有的是这个大间的家，
in 20 years.
在20年后。
But now we have the third decade.
但是现在呢，有这个第3个10年，
The big family continues to pay the same as they've been doing for 20 years,
这大家庭呢还是继续的还银行贷款，
whereas the small family, for 10 entire years, they have no payments.
而小家庭呢，这10年他们不需要还任何的债。
And at this point, they're both living in that dream house that they both wanted to begin with.
而在这个10年内呢，他们2个人都是住在他们想要得到的这个大屋子。
Here's the amazing thing.
这个是最特别的事情。
The total amount that they paid over the 30 years.
总共他们在这30年还的钱，
The big family paid over $500,000.
大家庭呢还了超过50万的钱，
Whereas the small family only $365,000.
而小家庭只还了36万。
Notice the difference in how much the small family saved. $156,000.
你看一看这小家庭，他们可以节省的钱是多少呢？是15万以上。
So both families ended up in their dream home.
所以最后2个家庭都得到了他们想要的家。
But the smalls ended up paying off their dream home a full 10 years before the bigs.
但是小家庭在大家庭10年以前就还清他们的债。
The small family's mortgage payment was lower for the first 10 years, slightly higher for the second 10 years, and they had no payments in their third 10 years.
他们还债的呢，前10年他们还比大家庭少一点，第2个10年他们比大家庭还多一点，第3年他们不需要还。
And this is crazy right here.
这个呢是最厉害的。
The small saved enough money in total that they could have gone back and bought their first house in cash with the surplus.
那小家庭呢，储蓄够钱的话呢，他们还可以回去呢买他们卖掉的第一间家。
By buying smart, the smalls can own 2 houses and have them both paid off 10 years before the bigs finish paying off their first house.
所以如果他们很聪明的话呢，这小家庭拥有2间屋子，2间屋子都还清了，而且是在大家庭10年前就还清了。
So is there a better way of buying a house?
所以买小屋子先是不是好的事情呢？有没有一个聪明的方式去买呢？
I'm not saying you can't buy a big house.
我不是告诉你不可以买大屋子，
I'm just saying don't make your dream house become a nightmare.
我只是要告诉你，不要让你梦想的家呢成为你最大的噩梦。
The principle that undergirds this are just a couple.
这里底下的这个原则只有1-2个而已。
Only borrow as much as you need.
借的钱呢，只借你需要用到的。
And being out of debt and paying off your debt is 9 times out of 10 the best decision you can do.
而越快还清、最快还清的债务呢，在10次里面有9次呢是最正确的选择。
And to be willing to be content with what's smaller and then gradually grow into something bigger and nicer, you're going to end up being ahead.
你愿意从小开始，慢慢得到越多的话呢，是最好的办法，你可以节省最多的钱。
And so this brings us to the conclusion of this seminar.
所以这讲座的结束的时候，
And I know there may be questions and we can talk more later.
知道你们会有很多问题，我们迟一些会回答。
But let us bow our heads for prayer.
待会儿我们低下头做祷告。
Father in heaven, I pray that you will continue to guide us as we contemplate how best to manage your money.
天上父，求主你帮助我们，引导我们，让我们思想如何最好的运用你的钱财，
Help us to be wise stewards,
帮助我们成为聪明的管家，
principled stewards,
有原则的管家，
and stewards that are capable of not just hiding your talent, but to increase it for you.
能够为你增加你所给我们的管家，而不是把它埋在泥土里。
And guide us the remainder of this day, we pray.
求主你今天继续的带领我们，
In Jesus' name,
奉主耶稣名求。
amen.